As mentioned, my lean journey started in January 1982. It's my first general manager job at the General Electric Company in the United States. I was the head of the high intensity and quartz lamp department. We made outdoor light bulbs, not the fixtures, but the bulbs. So all the street lighting and things like that, the different types, that's what we made. And we started a little Kanban project. This is back, in '82, GE wasn't doing any lean stuff. In fact, the term lean didn't come into being until 1996. So this is way before that word even was heard. And we just did this little Kanban project between my business and one of my supplier companies, which was also part of the lighting business group. And we were just moving these little arc tubes that we used to make our bulbs. They made the arc tubes and they sent them to us. And all we did was we bought a van, and we took that van every day from their plant to my plant. It was about 45 minutes. We put a Kanban card on top of these arc tubes, and we said, okay, that's how we're going to order arc tubes. So what happened was my inventory went from something like 40 days worth of these arc tubes down to 3. And their inventory went from a couple of 3 months that they kept for us down to nothing. And so that was pretty impressive. But at that time in General Electric, no one cared about inventory particularly. But what we noticed in the process of doing this was that the other things that occurred around this were really impressive. First of all, my customer service got better. My lead times dropped. Productivity got better. Quality got better. I freed up a lot of space. The people in the factory were much happier. And I just said, boy, this is a really powerful approach to things. And I'm going to make sure that any business that I run from now on, I'm going to try and use this just-in-time approach, is what we called it at that time, and try and do that. So the point is, I've always done this from the position of CEO or chairman or whatever. And I've always looked at it from a business perspective. And not as a bunch of tools. The thing that's been surprising to me after writing a book is I've learned how many people look at lean as just a bunch of tools. It doesn't make any sense when you look at it that way, because lean is really the biggest strategic weapon you can ever have, and regulating it to a bunch of tools doesn't make sense. For example, I see a lot of companies that they like this tool or that tool, and some of them pick the Six Sigma tool. Six Sigma is a nice tool in lean. It's very helpful in certain circumstances, and you ought to use it. We used it. But when you say, oh, we do Six Sigma, we have green belts and black belts, and therefore we're lean, that's nuts. Doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, you're trying to run a business here. You're not trying to run a karate class. But if you're gonna run a business, you have to define what is a business. And this is a place where people make a big mistake as well. Businesses, any business, is nothing but a collection of people and processes trying to deliver value to a set of customers. And always the best team wins. But we don't do it that way. Most companies, they might think that's okay for your company, but for their company, they're going to tell you why they're so more complicated and things are so different in their company and blah, blah, blah. And all they're doing is teeing up all the excuses why they can't get better. But if you think of it this way, and you think about it's only people and processes, it's pretty easy to go after and solve those kind of things. In fact, if you look at the way we run a traditional business, the one thing that we do in almost every case is we take our value-adding activities for granted. For example, if you went in to run a new company and you said, what's the lead time? And you were told, well, boss, the lead time is 6 weeks. And you say, well, that's pretty bad. Well, oh, no, you don't understand. Our competitors are all 8 or 9 weeks. We used to be 8 or 9 weeks, and now we're 6. We're way better than anybody else. You say, well, I still don't like 6. Oh, wait, but you don't understand. It takes us 3 hours to change over the machines. It used to take 5 hours. Now we're so much better. Our competitors are still at 5 hours. So after a while, you give up and you sort of accept the fact that I can't change the value-adding activity. And therefore, what I have to do is create a strategy that allows my customer to conform to my 6-week lead time. And then, of course, to be a traditional manager, I'm going to spend a lot of my time focusing on make the month. But think about that. Make the month. What is make the month? First of all, what is this month that you're spending so much effort to try and make? It's not a real thing, is it? It's something you made up last year at the budget time. It never existed before. You made it up. And you're going to kill yourself to try and make it. And secondly, it's something that already happened. For most companies, they can't close the books until 3 weeks after the prior month. So here we are in November. At the end of the 3rd week of November, you're going to learn what happened last month in October. So if you do that, then you're always going to run your company looking backwards. You're not looking forward. The reality, however, is that value is created by improving your own value-adding activities, and then taking that improved value-adding activities and delivering that value to your customers. In this way, you're conforming to your customers' needs, not the other way around. So it's really the opposite of the traditional approach. In fact, lean across the board in every area is pretty much the exact opposite of what you learned in the traditional approach. And in fact, lean is the best value creator ever, because it establishes vast changes to your value-adding activities, and every time you do that, one of the things that happens is that you reduce the amount of time it takes to do these things. And if you can compete on time, then you're going to gain market share and you're going to grow. So really, lean is a growth strategy. It's not a cost-cutting thing. It's not a manufacturing thing. It's a growth strategy. But we messed this all up. We started out, as I said, with just-in-time. But as just-in-time came from Japan and Toyota, it wasn't really so much Japan, it was Toyota. As it came from Toyota, we said, oh, we couldn't leave that alone. We said it has to be just-in-time inventory. So you never just said just-in-time, you said, oh, just-in-time inventory. But then we also were sure that you couldn't really take inventory out of the whole supply chain, so it just became a question of who held the inventory. So then it became just-in-time inventory, go beat the heck out of your supplier. Right? That's how we did it. And then along comes Dan and Jim Womack, and they give us the book Lean Thinking. This explained it across the whole value stream. It explained it as a strategy, et cetera, all the right stuff. But we couldn't leave that alone either. Eventually, lean thinking turned into, for the most part, if you mention lean, you say, oh, you mean lean manufacturing. You know, we added something to it. We added manufacturing to it, which is a really sad thing in my mind, because first of all, if you're not in manufacturing, then you think, well, that doesn't apply to me. I don't need to know about that. But even worse, if you're in manufacturing, most CEOs say, oh, lean manufacturing, that's something I can delegate down to my VP of operations, let him do it. Doesn't have to be part of the overall company strategy. So it's really a tragedy, and the issue we have is how do we get back on track? So what I want to talk about today is, why do you want to do lean? What do you need to know up front before you start it? Because there are some key things that if you don't do these things or don't understand them, you won't be successful. And then we'll talk mostly about how. How do you implement this? What are the steps you have to take to be successful? First of all, why? Well, I just said you're running a business, and if you're running a business, you'd like that business to be successful. Let me show you some WIREMOLD results. I could show you, we had a talk yesterday and I showed 4 or 5 or 6 different companies' results, but for today, we'll just show WIREMOLD. Our lead times went from 4 to 6 weeks down to 1 to 2 days. Productivity was up. We gained 13 points. This is over about a 9-year period, by the way. We gained 13 points of gross margin. Now think about it in your own company. Would you or would you not like to have 13 more points of gross margin? And a lot of the reason we were able to do this because of setup reduction. We took machines that we used to change over 3 times a week, and we were changing them over 20 to 30 times a day. I'll give you an example. When I first got there, we had a lot of different kinds of equipment, one of which was a rolling mill. And a rolling mill is a pretty long piece of equipment, almost as long as this room is. And I looked at the first rolling mill. I had never seen a rolling mill before, and I said, how long does it take to change this thing over? Oh, it takes about 14 hours. 14 hours? We can't do that. They looked at me, I'm the new CEO, they said, what are you talking about? That's what it takes, 14 hours. They said, what do you think? I said, we have to have this in 10 minutes. So of course they were all horrified. How do we get this guy as our CEO? He's obviously an idiot. And so we said, we're going to get it to 10 minutes. So we did the first Kaizen, we did the next Kaizen. We had to do quite a few Kaizens on this machine because we had to alter the machine in certain ways, and the machine was still producing products, so we couldn't really get at it all the time. So probably it took us 4 or 5 Kaizens, maybe about 9 months worth of time or something like that. And then guess what? We could change it over in 6 minutes. And now what do you think they thought? Now they said, okay, well, no, that was interesting. What's his next stupid idea? So the next stupid idea was 150-ton punch press, 3 hours and 10 minutes to 1 minute. Injection molding machines, 2.5 hours to 1 minute, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you start doing these things, it enables all the rest of this stuff to happen. Our inventory turns went from 3 to 18. Our sales quadrupled. EBITDA was up from 6.2% to about 21%. Our operating income was up over 13 times. And the best thing was the enterprise value from when we started to when we sold the company in the year 2000 increased by almost 2,500% over 9 years. So everybody that was a stakeholder turned out very, very happy. So if this is so cool, how come not everybody's doing it? Well, back when I started to learn this stuff at Danaher, we came across the Shinjujutsu consultants. And the Shinjujutsu people, was only 3 of them at the time, and they had all spent their whole career at Toyota, and they had all worked for 10 or 12 years directly for Taiichi Ohno, implementing lean in the first-tier suppliers and in the component companies that Toyota owned. And so these guys learned it from the source. They were the creators of this stuff. So I was fortunate enough to learn from them. And myself and a guy that worked for me at the time named George Konensaker, he was running one of my businesses. I was a group executive, and George ran the business called Jake Break. And we both saw this as the biggest strategic weapon we have ever seen in our whole life. From the beginning, we never thought of tools. It wasn't tools. This was a strategic business weapon that you could just kill your competition with. So one day we're having lunch with Yoshiki Iwata, who was the head of Shinjujutsu. We said, Mr. Iwata, you know, this is the most strategic weapon we've ever seen. How does Toyota let you guys loose to teach anybody else about this stuff? And he laughed and he said, well, you know, he says, I can tell you about the Toyota production system. I can take you and show you the Toyota production system, but I bet you can't go home and do it. And that's always been true. There's so many companies think, oh, I read a couple books, I can do this, but you can't. It's too difficult to overcome all the paradigms. So it's easy to say and it's hard to do. And so you really kind of need a methodology, an approach, if you will, to do this. And there's some upfront things, in my opinion, that you have to have before you can even try it or even think to be successful. First of all, you need 3 management principles, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you need to be driving home the lean fundamentals all the time. The lean fundamentals are a little different than a bunch of lean tools. These are the fundamental things that drive the Toyota production system. And the key ingredient here, of course, is leadership, and we'll talk about that as we go on. Because without leadership, you might as well not do this. After we got written up in the book Lean Thinking, we had a lot of people wanting to do, we got written up in Lean Thinking, we got written up in Gemba Kaizen by Amai, we got written up in other things, and so people wanted to come and tour WIREMOLD all the time. So we felt kind of obligated. We said, okay, we'll let that happen. But then we were getting too busy. There was too many tours, and we said, you know, it's okay to do this if the people who come go home and do something. But if they go home and they don't do anything, then we just wasted our time. So let's make a new rule. You can still come and visit WIREMOLD, but you've got to bring your CEO. Guess what happened to the tours? All stopped, right? All the tours stopped. Nobody could bring their CEO. And the ones who occasionally did, the management team dragged the guy in. And by the time they left, we would say, well, what do you think they're going to do when they go home? We all said, nothing. That guy, the concrete head in the room was the CEO. Nothing's going to happen. So without the leadership, all this is nonsense. So, but the management principles you need are these 3 things. And you have to have all 3 of these in place to even have any chance of being successful. We're going to cover each of them in a little more detail, but the 3 of them are: lean is the strategy. You're trying to compete on your operational excellence, so you're trying to create that operational excellence. So it's sort of the foundational core of your strategy. It doesn't mean you have to change all the strategic things you're doing now. It just means that if you go after working on your operational excellence, that all the strategic things you're doing now will become easier to do. Second is you have to lead it from the top. It takes leadership to do this. And the third is you have to understand that what you're trying to do fundamentally is transform the people. Lean, in my way of thinking, is all about people. It's a people thing. It's not capital intensive. It's not something like that. Talk about lean as a strategy. What we're talking about here is what you want to do is focus on your processes, not your results. The results, as we just said, already happened. You can't do anything about those. But you can do things about what's going to happen next by working on improving the processes, because each time you improve the processes, the results in the next period are going to be better. So you have to focus in the opposite way that you've probably been doing. And if you improve the processes, you're going to improve your strategic options. For example, if you take your lead time from 6 weeks to 2 days, your strategic options are way different than they were when you had 6 weeks, right? There's things that you can do that you never could do before. And if you also improve from 6 weeks down to 2 days, you can run a time-based growth strategy. You can compete on time. And time is a very powerful competitive weapon, because not only is it a competitive advantage in terms of speed, but you can charge for time. You know, think about something that like the post office. I don't know how it works here, but in the United States, in the federal post office, which loses billions of dollars every year, but you can still send a letter for about 50 cents, and it'll get there in a couple of days, any place in the US, and it's very reliable. Or you can run down to FedEx, and you can get it there tomorrow. It'll cost you $15. So 50 cents, $15, and people are lined up at the FedEx office. So my point is, not only is time a benefit in terms of responding, but it's also something that you can charge for. So what we're talking about here is that you want operational excellence to be the core of your strategy. Lead from the top. You have to lead from the top. People resist change. They don't like it. And so the CEO has to lead by example. They have to be sort of out front, hands-on, in the gemba, showing that they care and that they're working on things. And you also have to understand that you're going to learn yourself by doing things. Lean is something that you don't read about and learn that way. You learn it only by doing. And you also, even though you may not start out as a lean expert, you have to commit to being a lean expert, or you're just not going to get the bang for the buck here that you would once you become a lean expert. If you're going to be a leader, that means people have to follow you. And people follow you because they think you know something that they don't. For example, if you went into my business in WIREMOLD and saw a 14-hour setup and you didn't know anything about lean, you wouldn't immediately say, oh, it has to be 10 minutes, would you? I mean, then you'd think you were an idiot yourself, besides what they thought. But if you understood and you had done this a lot of times and you had seen what's happened in other places, putting out the goal of 10 minutes wasn't a big deal. It was just something that you knew could happen. So becoming a lean expert, I think, as the leader is a very important commitment to make. And then the key is you got to transform the people. People are the only asset you have that appreciates. And you want that to keep appreciating. And so teaching them the lean principles and lean tools and getting involved in KAIZEN and learning constantly is something that's going to really help your business. You also have to respect your people. The best ideas on any kind of improvements are always going to come from the people who do the work. That shouldn't be hard to understand, but for a lot of people it is. And you want to create, therefore, a learning environment where everybody's learning something new all the time and they feel that they're contributing and they're excited to go to work every day. What you're trying to do is to go from lean as the strategy to lean as the culture. If you get your company to the point where lean is the culture, in other words, this is the way we do things here, you're going to be very, very hard to beat. Now, the other thing you have to do is drive the lean fundamentals into the business on a constant basis. I'm not going to go through an explanation of these in detail. I'm going to make an assumption that most of you know what they are. But if all you did as a CEO was to run around every day saying, hey, is everything working to tack time? Do we have everything in a one-piece flow yet? And in those one-piece flows, is everything working to standard work? And are we on a pull system? Pull from the customer, pull from the suppliers, is everything on a pull system? If you just drove that in all the time, you have a chance of being successful. So let's talk about how do you implement this? How do you go about it? First of all, there's some sort of upfront work that you need to do. You need to tell people what the vision is. You should establish some core values because you're trying to go from lean as a strategy to lean as the culture. And if you establish the right core values, then you can build that culture around those values. You also need a sort of code of conduct, or you could call it setting expectations. What do you expect people to do when they come to work? What behavior do you want from them in return for what you're trying to do? And then, of course, you need to obtain the lean knowledge. That means that, as we said before, you can't just go home and do this yourself. You need to have some outside consultants, or in these days, you can also hire some people in to run your KAIZEN and promotion office. In our portfolio companies now, we take both approaches. We bring in some lean consultants to help, and we form a Kaizen promotion office. But the most important thing is to understand this isn't, I hired a lean consultant and let them do it. This is something you have to do. They're just assisting you. It's the other way around. We work with Shin Jiu-Jitsu for years. I'm still working with them 25 years later. I never, ever, ever received a PowerPoint presentation or anything even like that from them. They were just training us how to problem solve and see things on the shop floor all the time. Besides, I couldn't read any PowerPoint presentation from them. It would be in Japanese. Now, articulate your vision. This is the WIREMOLD strategy. We put this together on purpose years ago, 1991, on purpose to be a generic strategy. In other words, any manufacturing company, in fact, almost any company, if you just took this home, copied it word for word, and were religious about implementing it, you'll beat the heck out of your competition. It fits almost everybody. Because we're not saying anything very dramatic. We're saying we'd like to be the #1 company in every industry we compete in. Well, so does everybody. And we'd like to be the top 10 time-based competitor globally. The time-based part's harder. It's hard to measure that. But it gives you a driving thing that says, I just want to keep reducing the time on everything. And in order to talk about competing on operational excellence, you have to define it. So we defined it as step #1, which was to continually strengthen our base operations. And we established 5 key things: 100% on-time customer service, 50% reduction in defects each year, 20% reduction in 20% productivity gain each year, 20 times inventory turns as the first step target. We were at 3, by the way. Visual control and the 5 S's at the point of value adding. And the key about this is we ran the company on these 5 things. When we created value stream leaders, every week those value stream leaders had to present to myself and my team how they were doing on these 5 things. We closed the books at the end of the month and all that, but we didn't really spend a lot of time on that because, like I said, that already happened. But this was the stuff that was going forward, and so we spent all our time running the company on these 5 things. And then because you're going to get these kind of productivity gains, you need some growth aspect to it. So we said we wanted to double in size every 3 to 5 years. That was our target. We just literally grabbed that out of the air as a good target. It would be enough growth that would offset the 20% productivity gain part. The reality turned out to be that we doubled the first time in 4 years, and we doubled the second time in another 4 years. So we hit the middle of that target every time. The growth part was going to be selective acquisitions. We did 21 of them. And using QFD to speed up new product introductions. QFD and Kaizen, or Lean, if you will, were the 2 sort of pillars of what WIREMOLD did. We understood very early that 80% of the cost of a product occurs at the design stage. It doesn't occur later on, what you do, try and fix it later on. It just occurs in design. So how you design it and what you design was very important. And QFD gave us a great tool to be doing that. In fact, what we called it, we designed it with our ears. And what that meant was we designed it by listening to what the customer really wanted, not something that the CEO wanted or that the head of engineering wanted. We designed it with our ears. So these 2 pillars were really a great strength for us. Then we created 3 core values: people, customers, and Kaizen. If you think about it, these things kind of very simply encompass everything. We wanted great people. We wanted to train the people and grow the people. We used Kaizen as a tool to do that. And the combination of those 2 things were always solving problems for customers. So the whole loop got closed all the time. We built our culture around those 3 things. Then we created a code of conduct, and you could call this a list of expectations. This is how we wanted you to behave in the company. We wanted you to respect others, to tell the truth, be fair, try new ideas, ask why, keep your promises, and do your share. Pretty simple list. We published this on little plastic wallet cards everybody could carry around. We plastered it all over the walls. We made sure that everybody knew about this. We talked about it at profit-sharing meetings, that kind of thing. So this became part of the cultural aspect of WIREMOLD. And then the next thing we did after we created the strategy and other things, then we reorganized the business for Lean. We were organized around value streams. If you want to change the culture and change what's happening, change the structure. You can't keep the same structure and think you're going to change everything. So we created value stream leaders or team leaders. These were really like product family people. And then we also created a Kaizen promotion office to support that. And we understood early on that everything has to change. This is something that most companies just can't deal, they can't, first of all, they can't understand it. They want to drop lean on top of a batch organizational structure and think they're going to do something. That's never going to happen. You have to understand everything has to change. For example, sales. When we first started, it's just early on in Kaizen, one of my first questions was, what percentage of our sales do we ship in the last week of the month? The answer was 45 to 50%. I said, well, gee, that doesn't work, does it? I'm trying to level load production here, and you're telling me that 45 to 50% of the sales were in the last week of the month? They just don't compute. I said, so why are 45 to 50% of the sales in the last week of the month? And the rationale was, well, that's our sales terms mostly. The sales terms that we give to customer incentivize them to order in the last week of the month. I said, great, then we'll just change the sales terms. My sales manager said, no, you don't understand. He said, those aren't just our sales terms, they're the sales terms for every electrical distributor in the United States. Anybody that sells through that channel has those sales terms. My reaction was, well, I don't care. I'm going to change the sales terms. And so we did. It took us about 2 years, lots of yelling and screaming from the distributors. But we got that accomplished, flattened out the sales input. Really helped us a lot. But because we understood that you can't disconnect sales from what's going on in operations and think you're going to be lean. That they have to be linked together. And we did, I always say do a reduction in force up front. Most companies are 25 to 40% too many people when you start this. And so you have to understand that that's the case. And the more of those you can get out early on some very nice basis, we did an early retirement program, then the better off you are. In our case, 30% of the people took it. So then it was like, oh my God, now what are we going to do? That's a lot of people that went out the door. But we have to get everybody on board early. And then once you have those upfront things done, you have the organizational set, you created the vision, now it's sort of full steam ahead. And here the CEO has to kind of take over. CEO should make the announcement in person, don't send out a memo, explain to people why you're doing this, what do you expect and what's in it for them. And then the CEO should do the initial training. Don't say, I hired this consultant, he can do the training. He can help you to do the training, but you should do the training because if it's coming from the CEO, it's pretty clear to people that, hey, we're serious about this, we're going to do this, we better pay attention to this. The CEO should also pick the first Kaizens. I picked Kaizens for 2 or 3 years before I turned it over to anybody because if you don't do that, what happens is the people in the organization will pick Kaizens in some small remote thing, the smallest product line you have, just as an experiment. And you're running a business. You want the biggest bang for the buck that you can get. You want to pick the biggest, most profitable product line to do the Kaizens on to begin with. And only the CEO is going to push that. And then you need to set stretch goals. This is a debate when I talk to different CEOs, talk to them about setting stretch goals, there's so many of them say, oh, I don't want to do that, Art, because if I set goals too high, I'll lose my people. They'll just give up. And I say it's just the opposite. Setting stretch goals is a show of respect for your people. It says that you believe that with some help that they can accomplish amazing things. So you're respecting them. And let me give you an example. I showed you those WIREMOLD targets, 50% reduction in defects, right? Let's say that Mr. I don't want to set stretch goals says, I want to set a 5% reduction in defect target. And I said, fine, I'm going to stay with 50% reduction in defects. So at the end of the year, his team does a wonderful job, and they beat the target by 50%. They get 7.5% reduction in defects. My team, on the other hand, struggled a little bit this year. We missed the target by 20%. So we only got a 40% reduction in defects. They're happy, we're a little sad. What's happening here? I'm killing this guy. If this happens year after year for 4 or 5 years, he's dead meat, right? But he doesn't want to set these stretch goals. I'm just going to eat his lunch, it's fine. But I'm also respecting my people, and he's not. And you have to understand that as you move ahead and start doing a lot of Kaizen, that Kaizen is really a full-time job. That's the power of Kaizen. The power of Kaizen is putting a team on a project with set goals that have to be done by the end of the week. It's a doing exercise, not a planning exercise, and it's also a tremendous learning exercise for everybody. The main thrust, of course, is to go from batch to flow, from push to pull. And if you're a manufacturing company, at least, you have to understand that inventory is always the root of all evil. It's the thing that's hiding the waste, and therefore you're trying to get at the waste, but this inventory is hiding the waste. So you're trying to get rid of inventory all the time. What kind of results can you get from a 1 week Kaizen? I don't know if you can see this in the back, so I'll read some of it. You can cut the lead times 90%, cut staffing from 5 to 10 people, reduce inventory by 70%, reduce the floor space by half, cut the defects by 60%, reduce travel distance by 90%, cut setup times by 90%. My experience over many, many years in setup reduction is that you can almost always in a week-long Kaizen get a 90% reduction in setup time. And every one of your engineers will tell you that's nonsense. That can't be done. And yet we've done it in all kinds of equipment forever. The leader's role in all this stuff is you have to make the case for change, and you have to keep making it all the time. You have to get everybody on board, and you have to find the concrete heads and get rid of them. If you can take, you're not going to have a lot of concrete heads, but you're going to have a few, and they're going to be in positions that are going to be kind of blocking. They'll block your progress. So the best thing you can do is identify them and help them get a job with your competitors. Because that would be a wonderful place for them. They'd be way happier there, and you'd know that they're never going to catch up with you because now they got the concrete head. You also should implement policy deployment or Hoshin Kanri as early as possible. It really helps you to align the resources. Most companies fail because they try and have 10 number one projects, and they can only resource 3. And the Hoshin Kanri process helps you identify what you can really resource. It's kind of like a juggler, right? If you can juggle 3 balls all day, and I say, here, try 4 balls. Well, when he can do that for a little bit, but then when he drops, he doesn't just drop the 4th ball, does he? He drops all the balls. And that's the same with when companies try and do 10 projects. They don't just drop one of the projects, they drop all 10. Nothing ever happens. So Hoshin Kanri is very important early on. The leader also has to be the guy who pushes through and takes all the leaps of faith that are going to be needed here. Lean is nothing but a series of leaps of faith. You know, I told you when Konaseker and I were talking to a water, and we said, we made a pact early on when we started working with Shinjitsu. We said, whatever they tell us to do, we're going to do it. Even if we think it's the dumbest thing we ever heard. And about half the time, we thought it was the dumbest thing we ever heard. But we did it anyway. And then, when it didn't work, which was about half the time of that, we said, we're not going backwards. We're going to fix it and make it work. And because of that, we went very fast. I mean, a lot of progress. But somebody has to push through those leaps of faith, have to say, go ahead and do it. And the only one that can really do it is a CEO. You also have to push through when problems occur. Things aren't always going to go well. And they're going to have problems, and that's going to cause customer service issues, and it's going to cause other things. And so someone has to to me, that was always a reason to go faster to get rid of those problems. But your organization is going to say, see, I told you so. I told you this wouldn't work here. And if you blink and listen to that, then you're dead. You're not going to make any progress on this. And that's what happens to a lot of people. The CEO also has to overcome the lore. Excuse me. All companies have some sort of lore, industry lore or company lore. I was on the board of directors of a company that made jewelry, gold and precious stones, but they were making it for like middle market companies like J.C. Penney and Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward, that kind of thing. And they asked me to come down, and I got down there and I said, well, what? This is in Miami, and so pretty much the whole workforce spoke Spanish except for me. I could hardly talk to anybody. I said, well, what's the problem? I said, how long does it take you to make a ring? They said, well, it takes 8 weeks. I said, 8 weeks? Are you nuts? It's only that big. What could you be possibly doing it for 8 weeks? They said, no, that's the industry standard. And sure enough, later on, not too long after that, I met a bunch of other people from the jewelry industry, and the first question I always asked them was, how long does it take to make a ring? They all said 8 weeks. So they said, what do you think? I set up a cell, we did it in 2 days. Any order that came in today, we could wax it, cast it, and ship it tomorrow, all the time. And when we started, I had a cell set up with 13 people trying to do 275 rings a day. They couldn't do it. We had to keep making little changes. Pretty soon they made the 275, big cheer went up. Then they made 300, then they made 350, then they made 400, then they made 450. They sort of capped out around 450, but we got this enormous productivity gain just because we put this visual control board up on the wall next to them, said this is what you're supposed to do the first hour, the second hour, the third hour. They could track their progress throughout the day, and they just ran to that. No particular incentive. So that's sort of overcoming the law. The law says 8 weeks. I walk in off the street and say, no, 2 days, and we set it up and do it in 2 days. So, what you're trying to do here is if you're the leader, you want ideas from 1,000 people, not from just 25. One of the more powerful parts of Toyota, as we heard just the talk before this, was the number of employee suggestions that occur in Toyota is enormous. And the fact that most of them get implemented is really impressive. It's hard to do that. But that's what you want. You want that kind of participation from your people. The lean leader also has to establish daily management at the point of value adding. You have to identify breakthroughs and set the stretch goals, like we said. You have to respect and support your associates. The best ideas are going to come from them, so you have to respect them. And you have to support them. When you walk through the factory and you have these visual controls, stop and look at them. Show that you have interest in this. Ask questions about them. If you just walk through, they say, well, what am I filling this out for? They don't care about this stuff. So basically, the CEO has to be the lean zealot. Otherwise, pretty hard to do. The next thing you need to do is as this is going on, you need to start to dump your bad habits. Standard cost accounting is the baddest of bad habits because it really incentivizes, first of all, it doesn't give you good information, but on top of that, it incentivizes all the things you're trying to change with lean. Standard cost accounting incentivizes you to build inventory. Standard cost accounting, for example, if you came in and you have to make a product and it takes 10 machines and only 9 of them are running today, in a lean world, we just would fix that 10th machine until we could get it working, and then we'd make product. In a standard cost world, you'd run the other 9 machines full blast, not making any single product that you could ship that day, making lots of unbalanced inventory. And at the end of the day, the finance guy would say, you had a great day today, you made almost all the absorption hours. That's nuts, but that's how we do things. Traditional measurements, direct to indirect hourly measurements, those are crazy. In lean, we just look at, how do we be efficient? And we're not worried about direct to indirect measurements. In fact, a lot of times we're taking people that used to be direct and turning them into water spiders or indirect people to help make the direct people more efficient. Big end of the month financial reviews. Close the books, look at the numbers, but don't spend a lot of time on this. That already happened, right? Last month already happened. Work on next month. And also lengthy capital request, CapEx projects, capital request program. I see all kinds of companies where if you want to spend $500,000 on a capital project, you got to fill out all kinds of forms. You have to have all kinds of ROI. There's 3 or 4 or 5 levels of review. It takes 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 2 months or something to do it. But if you add $5 million to inventory, there's no process for that at all. It just gets added. No one asks you anything. But the $5 million and the $500,000, they're the same dollars or the same pounds, right? It's the same thing. One has a process, one doesn't have a process. They say, oh yeah, well Art, the reason that's true is because the CapEx products, that's fixed, and the inventory is not fixed. My response is, if you think the inventory is not fixed, you're nuts. The only reason it's not fixed is that eventually you're going to have a big write-off because you built too much of it. And that's when it becomes unfixed. But in the meantime, it's just as fixed as the capital. So my point here is look forward, not backwards. And capitalize on the gains that you make. Profit sharing is a great tool to go with lean. We had a great profit sharing plan in WIREMOLD, and it really got everybody on board and kept them with us. A lean bonus system. I've used the same one at WIREMOLD and all my portfolio companies. And basically, the bonus system is 40% of your bonus is on working capital turns, 40% is on earnings, and 20% is on certain strategic things. That's it. Because if you incentivize your balance sheet, the things you do in your balance sheet are the things that are going to drive your earnings all the time. And most people just disregard the balance sheet. They don't even understand it. And then use lean in acquisitions. Acquisitions are great for lean. It provides the cash, lowers the risk, and it creates a great game plan right away. We always were, in the little acquisitions we were doing, I said we did 21, we got to the point where most of the time we could get all of our cash back in 3 years. And then that company was generating more cash for the next acquisition. And we had a game plan that when we did an acquisition, the first thing that happened, I would go there, my finance guy would go there, and we'd do a presentation on WIREMOLD, we'd take a break, we'd do a 3-hour training on lean, we'd have lunch, and after that we'd start the first KAIZEN work that day. And in one case, I remember we were in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and we started this, and I had this team, I had the plant manager with me, and we were working on these. They had these automated assembly lines, conveyor belt assembly lines. They were longer than this stage. and they had about 5 of them. So we were working on one of them, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had the whole thing disconnected. I hooked it up to some forklift trucks, and I threw it away in the backyard. In the meantime, we created a new process. We're going to go from 10 people down to 6. The space was going to be about 25% of what it used to be, and we were going to make a little bit more product than before. So we went to dinner, and the plant managers, we had bought this company from a Fortune 500 company, a big company. So at dinner, the plant manager says, well, you know, that was pretty interesting what we did today. He said, I have a question. Does this mean that I don't have to write the 25-page monthly plant report anymore? And we looked at him and we said, well, you know, I don't know. If you really like to write it, you can keep writing it. But we're just going to promise you we're never, ever, ever going to read it. And we would just as soon you work on fixing this mess that you created. And so we did. And he turned out to be a really good guy. And we moved the business into another one of our businesses. And he wound up with the job of both plants. He had the overall responsibility. So lean actually is better in non-manufacturing companies. You get more gains, in my opinion, my experience of doing it in these other places, you get more gains there. Hospitals, life insurance, distributors. I'll give you a couple examples. Virginia Mason is a hospital in Seattle, Washington. When Virginia Mason started their lean journey, they started it with a trip to WIREMOLD in Hartford, Connecticut. Totally across the country. They flew 30 of their top people to WIREMOLD for 2 days. I started the discussion by saying, hey, look, we take a piece of plastic or metal, we run it through a bunch of processes, we punch holes in it, we attach stuff to it, we put it in a box, and we sell it. You start with a piece of raw material that happens to be a human body, you run it through processes, you punch holes in it, you attach stuff to it. You can't put it in a box, but you can put it in a car and send it home. So it's the same thing. And they said, yeah, okay, we got that. So then we spent the next 2 days showing them how we moved these things through these processes, how we punched holes in it and did all this other stuff. And they really got it. They went home and they took the whole team over to Japan, to Toyota, and they came back. And look at what they've done over 10 years. The nurses spend 90% of the time with patients versus the average hospital is around 35. They brought the cost of supplies down by $1 million a year. The accounts receivable days went way down. Their surgery center, which is a big fixed cost thing, has 60% more throughput. That's a huge thing on a big capital item like that. Their pharmacy, from order to available, is down by 93%. And their margin was break even basically in 2000. By 2010, they were making $41 million in a market that was pretty flat. Seattle hasn't been growing very much. So this is pretty impressive. Distribution warehouse. This happens to be one of my portfolio companies in Brussels, or not in Brussels, but in St. Nicholas, Belgium. And all we did here was we stopped the practice of picking by order, and we switched to a practice of picking by size and time. Look what happened. Headcount went down by 42%. We freed up 35,000 square feet of space, and that saved us $180,000 a year in rent. The picks per 10 feet of rack space went up by 367%. And the shipping errors went down by 90%. No capital costs, no money, no nothing. We were getting money back through this whole thing. Pretty simple. So, in summary, one of my teachers, Mr. Nakao from Shinjitsu, always used to tell me, Byrne-san, if you don't try something, no knowledge will visit you. So I hope that you can take that to heart, and that when you go home, if you don't try something, no knowledge will visit you either. And if knowledge visits you, however, lean provides the most unfair competitive advantage you're ever going to have. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.